Hey everyone, welcome to Princess Gay. I'm your host Connie, and today we are starting our countdown to Pokemon Gen 9. So, with Scarlet and Violet releasing at the end of this week, we're going to be doing a different countdown list each day. It's going to be fairly simple. It's going to be like a tier list countdown instead of like a um, video countdown. So, just making it simple, pretty easy. So, we are starting with our ranking of generations. So, you're going to be ranking all of generations 1 through 8. Let's get this up. And we have our categories here. So, legendary, which is, I guess you could say, S tier. We have pseudo legend, our A tier. Our B tier is master class. Our C tier is great class. Our D tier is Ultra Class, and our F tier is Poke Class. Now, just as a little bit of information, you may be wondering why Great Class is higher than Ultra Class. If okay, Pokeball, Ultra Ball, Great Ball, Master Ball. Why is Great Class higher? Because if you actually look into it, Great Balls are actually better than Ultra Balls. At least I think in earlier generations, I think that was the case. I don't know about current generations, but Great Ball, Ultra Balls, catch rates isn't that much better, if at all. And for the price that you pay, it's not worth it. It's better to just use Great Balls. It's a fun little fact I learned through watching some random videos on different channels like Patters and whatnot, True Green 7, those kind of YouTubers. Just a fun little fact for you today. But yeah, so we're going to be ranking these by the generation, 1 through 8, and I'm going to be accounting for every game in the generation. That means main series games, not including side games or whatnot, or spin-offs or anything like that. We will be considering main series games only. So, we start with Generation 1. Generation 1 started it all, but if we're being honest, the games are not all that great. If you go back and look at it, there's no story whatsoever to speak of. And it pretty much just throws you into the deep end and expects you to just accept it. And as a kid, it's that's usually fine. You're not going to be thinking about it. But especially going back as an adult and playing these games again after having played newer generation games, it's very clear that this was experimental at the time. It was new, it was fresh, and it wasn't really that well made. There were a lot of things that future generations would improve upon, even just Generation 2. And there were a lot of issues that just are there. Technical issues with different rates and whatnot within the coding, but also just in terms of enjoyability to play, it's just not that great. Looking at it through a critical lens these days. So I would put it in the Ultra class though. I think Poke class would be for the ones that are really bad, actively bad. But for me, Gen 1, it's not actively bad. It just doesn't really hold up nowadays. And keep in mind, by the way, this is all obviously my opinion. If your opinions are different, that's completely fine. That's completely fair. It's just subjective. Also, I am rating them as a whole generation, not just in terms of the games. My specific ranking for games overall might be slightly different. So, now we move on to Generation 2. Generation 2 improved on a lot from Generation 1. The map was much more interesting. It actually had more of a story to it. Even though the story was still very bare bones, it was at least something. And it introduced a lot more interesting creatures, a lot more interesting Pokemon. A lot of the trainers were also more interesting. With Gen 1, you got a lot of very basic, generic types of characters, gym leaders and whatnot. But in Gen 2, they were definitely made to be more unique. definitely expanded upon like personality and whatnot with them. Uh, Honestly, a lot of Gen 2's aesthetic is also a lot better for me personally. I feel like it feels more interesting than Gen 1, which is again just very basic. Not a lot to it. So I would definitely put Gen 2 higher, but I don't know if I'd go like into legendary or pseudo legendary. So I'm going to put Gen 2 in master class because I think that it definitely deserves to be notably higher than Gen 1 overall. But for gold, silver, and crystal, there are some major advancements and steps forward that it made, but it still wasn't quite there. One of the biggest things, obviously, is the introduction of being able to play as a female character with Crystal. That was a huge deal. And I just feel like there's more that future games did to improve even upon that. Next, we go into Gen 3. This is Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. And I believe Fire Red and Leaf Green. Let me just make sure here, just to be safe, because I don't remember if Fire Red and Leaf Green came out in Gen 3, during Gen 3 or Gen 4. And I want to be absolutely certain on that before we continue. Because I am counting those as part of the generation. That is a part of the generation, even if it's not the Hoenn games. Pokemon generations. Games. Okay. I should be able to find it pretty quickly here. Because I think it's just on Wikipedia in that way. If my phone works here. What the hell? It keeps like going back on me. What the fuck? Here we go. Sorry about the wait there. So let us talk about Gen 3. Let's just start with yeah, here we go. Okay. Oh, that's just a release timeline. That's not what I want. Hold on. It's like it's giving me like these big long paragraphs, and that's not quite what I want. Here we go. Here's a summary. Okay. So, with third generation, we had Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, and Fire Red and Leaf Green. I was correct on that. So, Gen 3 started with the new generation in Hoenn, and a lot of people really look fondly upon these games, and I do too. There's a lot about the Hoenn games that are very enjoyable, very memorable, and have a lot going for them. Emerald's battle, is it tower? Is it the battle tower or is it the battle facility in that one? I'm not 100% sure. It's been a while since I've gotten to that point in those games. But that alone is great, and the story with Team Aqua and Magma is like, this is where the story really started to become a thing with Pokemon. Like there was a slight story with Gold and Silver, but it really became notable in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. Emerald, obviously, with the third game in this set, just like with Yellow in Gen 1 and Crystal in Gen 2, it improved upon the first two games immensely. My only problem with Gen 3 is aesthetically, it's kind of boring. It kind of goes back to Gen 1 in terms of aesthetics. It doesn't quite hold up to Gen 2's fantastic aesthetical style. That's just my opinion. Like, in terms of graphics, it's obviously better than Gen 2, but aesthetics are different from graphics. And also, some of the Pokemon aren't as as memorable as Gen 2's. Gen 2 just really knocked it out of the park with its new Pokemon in a way that Gen 3 wasn't completely able to replicate. There are some standouts for sure. And I'm not saying I don't like Gen 3's Pokemon, I do. But yeah, overall. And then we had Fire Red and Leaf Green, remakes of the first generation, Red and Blue, which, yeah, eventually they went to green because that was what it was originally in Japan. They changed it to blue because of American sensibilities, I guess. I don't know. But Fire Red and Leaf Green were an obvious improvement over the original Red, Blue, and Yellow in, again, every way. They improved upon the issues that the first generation initially had with the Kanto games and made them a lot more playable. They're not perfect by any means. They still have their issues. It's still Kanto. Just in terms of like the, locations and all being super fucking boring. The roster of Pokemon being kind of generic and boring. But again, it was the first roster, so yeah, it definitely was better than how Gen 1 originally was. And overall, Gen 3 was very much better. I would put them in the great class, kind of between Gens 1 and 2. I think 2 is still overall better and more memorable, but Gen 3 gets close up there to me. Next, we go to Gen 4, and you guys already know Gen 4, for those of you who aren't, who haven't seen the channel and seen Nuzlockes and stuff, Gen 4 is my least favorite gen. It's honestly the only generation I actively hate. And that's been made more apparent with the recent attempt I had on my Pokemon Pearl Nuzlocke before that got fucked up because of my own mistake. But it was becoming even more apparent than even I remembered initially that I just didn't like the games. I didn't like playing them. Like, even if I wasn't doing a Nuzlocke, I don't like the generation. I don't like its layout. I don't like most of the new Pokemon, I would say. I don't like a lot of the trainers or gym leaders or whatnot. And my biggest issue with Gen 4 is it was at this time that because of how popular Pokemon was getting, they decided to focus on the competitive scene. And so the Pokemon Company decided, let's make the games specifically for the competitive players only. They made the games so immensely harder that it's going from Gen 3 to Gen 4, the difficulty spike is immense. They made a lot of changes, a lot of different variances with typings and stats and whatnot, and they did that specifically for competitive players to a point where it's not fun for a casual player like me. It's not a fun game. Gen 4, of course, I'm talking about specifically here the Sinnoh games, Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. But Gen 4 did also include Heart Gold and Soul Silver. And this is where I'm conflicted, because Heart Gold and Soul Silver, I would say, are two of the best games in the entire franchise. Again, just like the remakes for Gen 1, they improved upon the Gen 2 games. They improved upon Gold, Silver, and Crystal and made them even better. And so the question is, it's like, do I still put Gen 4 in the Poke class, the bottom class, even though it does also include Heart Gold and Soul Silver? If I was just counting Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, yeah, it would 100% be in the bottom class. But I think because of Heart Gold and Soul Silver and how good those are, I think that's actually going to bump up Gen 4 for me overall. And in fact, just on those two games alone, on their merit alone, I'm even going to put them above Gen 1. Because those two games are that good to where they would warrant that. And again, Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, are still my least favorite games. But because of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, that's why Gen 4 overall is getting that ranking. So next we move on to Gen 5. And Gen 5 is an interesting one. Because Gen 5 doesn't have any remakes in it. Instead, it is the first time where instead of just having a third game in the series, in the generation, we have direct sequels. We have Black and White and then Black and White 2. Black and White 2 are both direct sequels to the first Black and White. And this ranking actually would have been different before, but I actually was having some friendly debates, I guess you could say, on Twitter with one of my followers on there about Gen 5, and we were just talking and discussing about like characters and stuff, and I remember a lot less about that generation than I thought. Like, apparently there was a champion called Elder, and I don't remember him at all. I only remember Iris being the champion. But I guess she was only the champion in Black and White 2, and in the first games, it was this Elder guy who I don't remember at all. Like, I even looked up a picture of him, and I still don't remember him. I do not remember him existing at all. And I had to get reminded of who the gym leaders were. I had to get reminded on a lot of things. Because Gen 5, while not as bad as Gen 4 to me, is just not memorable. A lot of the new Pokemon roster is not that interesting and not that great. There are some standouts. Every generation will have at least a couple good Pokemon. But overall, the new roster was kind of weak, in my opinion. Black and White did introduce vastly improved graphics, which included like 3D with one of its cities, which was revolutionary without question for the time. But a lot about the games just did not do it for me. I also really am not a fan of the story of Black and White and Black and White 2. I don't even actually remember what the full story of Black and White 2 is. I just know Black and White is so pretentious and just ridiculously preachy. It's unenjoyable. It is so unenjoyable to go through. But yeah, Black and White 2, I would say, or Black and White and Black and White 2, I would say are still better than Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. But because Gen 4 also did have the Gold and Silver remakes, Heart Gold and Soul Silver, where do I put this by that comparison? I think, again, because Heart Gold and Soul Silver were that good, I would still put Gen 4 over Gen 5, but it's very close. And that's only because of Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Again, if it weren't for that, Gen 4 would still be on the bottom. And Gen 5 would be above it. And Gen 5 I'm putting also above Gen 1 because while there's a lot I don't like about Gen 5, it's like there's still a lot more to it, and they still improved drastically over the first generation. It's not even close in terms of like play quality. In terms of other factors, like I may go back to Gen 1 a lot more often than Gen 5, but still. Like, in terms of overall quality, in my opinion, Gen 5 still does have those improvements that were just needed for the games nonetheless. Gen 5 isn't, again, I don't dislike it as much as like Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, but there are issues with it that keep it from being higher than this for me. So now we go to Gen 6, which is X and Y with no third game or sequels or anything, plus Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. So, X and Y are often seen by a lot of people as being the worst of the generation, or the worst generation of Pokemon, not because they're bad, but because they're so absolutely boring and bland that they don't do anything for most people. And my view on this is that Gen 6, that X and Y are a little more boring and bland than other generations, but there's also a lot that they get right. And the stuff that they get right, they get very right. For example, the region. Like, have you seen Kalos? It is one of the best designed regions. I stand by that. Just in terms of just the general design of the region. The design of the cities and everything, the way it all works out. It is phenomenally designed. It's so much better than Kanto, Hoenn, I'd even say Johto. And I love Johto's design, as you know. But definitely better than Sinnoh or Unova. The only ones I would say are better are probably the ones that came after it, which I'll get to. But Gen 6 also had a smaller and kind of just less impressive roster of Pokemon overall. Again, there are some standouts, but overall the roster is not that great. Also, as I said, it's the first generation without any kind of like follow-up game. It just had X and Y. There was no Z, there was no X and Y 2 or anything like that. And apparently I think there was supposed to be, but like plans for that got canceled and there were issues that arose or something. But whatever actually happened with all of that, the point is that it didn't. We did, however, get Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. And how did those do? Well, they added a little bit, and obviously better graphics from the regular Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. But honestly, overall, I don't think Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were as good and successful as Heart Gold and Soul Silver were in, you know, improving on the original games. Like, they improved on Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, but nowhere near as much of a difference as Heart Gold and Soul Silver improved on Gold, Silver, and Crystal. So I would say X is better though than Gen 4 and 5 overall. And while it didn't improve upon Gen 3 that much, it still did. And while Gen 6 has some issues, the positives with X and Y are still very notable. And so overall, I'm going to put them above Ruby and Sapphire, or Gen 3 overall. Again, this is overall generations. It's not talking about specific games. It's everything in that generation. So keep that in mind. Because if this was specific games, it would be a very different list. I can tell you that already. So now we move on to Generation 7, in which we had Sun and Moon, and we had Ultra Sun and Moon, and we had Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. So we had the main generation games, the remakes, because they're basically remakes of Sun and Moon. Ultra Sun and Moon remake them and add more to them and everything. And then you have another set of remakes for Gen 1. So let's talk about it. Sun and Moon is a very divisive set of games. As for where I stand on them, I think they're fantastic. After Gens 4 through 6, in my opinion, kind of lost the luster of Pokemon for me, kind of became a lot less exciting and less interesting, and just not as good. Gen 7 revitalized it entirely for me. Sun and Moon changed up the formulas, but in the best possible way. The changing from gym leaders to totem Pokemon and everything, and the kahunas and all, was a fantastic idea. It made it fresh and new and exciting. Not to mention, without question, has one of the best stories in Pokemon. This and Gen 8, and I'll get to Gen 8. The story involving the Aether Foundation, Ultra Space, and obviously Guzma and everything as well, was just so damn good. It was so well handled. It was so great. Lusamine as the villain was amazing. She was absolutely fantastic as a villain. The characters otherwise were fantastic and memorable. The new Pokemon, fantastic and memorable. The region is gorgeous. Like, even if it's not the best overall designed, it is definitely the prettiest region. It has so much depth to its beauty that it just comes across as really pretty to look at. And just overall, I think Sun and Moon just revitalized the franchise at a time where it was needed. And then you have Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, which added a lot, especially regarding Ultra Space and the Ultra Beasts, to the original Sun and Moon formula. It also changed up things a little bit with Lusamine and her story, and it was really exciting in that way. I don't know as much about these games because they're like the only games in this franchise I haven't really like experienced as much. But from what I have experienced, they vastly improved on what was already a vast improvement on previous generations. And then we got Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, another set of remakes for the Kanto region for Gen 1. And here's where it gets interesting, because while I loved Sun and Moon and think Ultra Sun and Moon is a great improvement on those games, Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee are the worst games in the franchise, in terms of main games, in my opinion. But not for the same reason that I hate Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum are my least favorite games in the franchise, just on a personal level. I truly believe Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee are the worst games conceived from a technical standpoint in the franchise. And this is all, once again, as always, subjective. But this is based less on personal tastes and interests and more on what I think the games did in terms of their graphics, their overall, like, technical stuff, and all of that kind of thing. And in that regard, Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee are an absolute train wreck. They have an atrociously bad art style that is ugly to look at, and literally only one character in the entire game is just at all, like, how do I put it? Pleasant to look at? That's a weird way to put it, I guess, but you know what I mean. It's like, visually speaking, all the characters are just so unappealing visually. There's only one character that is visually appealing with that style, and that's Lorelei of the Elite Four. She is the only character that style works for. Every other character looks like shit. They look terrible in that style. On top of that, the gameplay taking elements from Pokemon Go is so fucking stupid and almost renders the games unplayable. The way you catch and train Pokemon and everything is so fucking ruined in these games, it's not funny. And on top of that, the leveling is so fucking difficult in the games because of the way you train and battle and catch Pokemon and everything. Because of that, it's exceptionally hard to level up your Pokemon properly, and because of that, really hard to get through the games at all. And don't even think about trying to catch Mewtwo at the end, because you will be so fucking underleveled for that, it's not funny. And it's going to be next to impossible to level up properly to get to the right level to, take on Mewtwo. Unless you have a Master Ball at that point, I guess, then just use that. But the point is, the games are absolute dog shit in terms of quality and everything. again, not based on just personal tastes and whatnot, but based more on the technical aspects of the game. Um, and that's where it gets confusing because again, I loved Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon. I feel like in terms of the main games of Generation 7, they saved the franchise and really brought it back into a new renaissance of this franchise, of the series. But the Let's Go games were so fucking bad that I can't put Generation 7 as a whole that high. In fact, because of how bad the Let's Go games were, I can't even put them in the great class. They were that bad. Gen 7, like if we were just talking about Sun Moon and Ultra Sun Moon, they'd be a pseudo legend. They would be a pseudo legend. But because of Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, they are bumped down to Ultra class. That's how bad those games are. In my opinion, of course. But now we get to the the current most recent generation, not final generation, leading up to obviously Gen 9 starting this coming weekend. And that is Gen 8. So in this we got Pokemon Sword and Shield. We got the DLCs for Sword and Shield, the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra. We got the Gen 4 remakes, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. And we got Legends Arceus, which is a Sinnoh prequel game with a different play style and is considered a main series game, surprisingly enough. So, let's talk about them in that order. Sword and Shield. If we were just judging this on Sword and Shield alone, I would put this in Legendary. Sword and Shield are without question my favorite Pokemon games and what I would consider to be the best made. In terms of the story, the characters, just the gameplay, the wild area is such an innovative, amazing decision. The raid battles, everything about it is practically perfect. It has some of the best character designs, some of the best new Pokemon. It has just some of the best new everything. The region is absolutely phenomenal. One of the top 3 regions alongside Johto and probably, I would say probably Kalos. Because while I loved Alola, just overall, I would not say it's one of the best regions. It's very pretty to look at, but not one of the best regions. I would say Johto and Kalos were better in terms of regional design and everything. But I would put Galar up there. The idea of the gyms being kind of like a sports centric, like tournament style thing was really inspired. Having, instead of a regular Elite Four, having a championship tournament at the end is phenomenal. It's something that should just be the norm, honestly. But I also understand why that would just be a Galar thing as well. And just everything about how it's presented is phenomenal. You get more world building and depth into the world than you ever have before. It feels more complete. It feels more special when you win. Everything about it is just so much more well thought out. Then you had the DLCs. Instead of getting a third game or a sequel game or whatnot, we got DLC because that's more possible now. So let's talk about them in order. The Isle of Armor was really damn good for a number of reasons. Reason 1, Honey Senpai. Like, I don't want to just sound horny, But Honey Senpai is one of the most attractive Pokemon characters, without question. The wife of the dojo master Mustard, she is stunning. Like, absolutely stunning. But she's also a great character. She's funny, she's kind and warm, but she's also fucking terrifying because she's just absolutely a monster in battle and just absolutely destroys this dumbass who tries to like challenge them or whatnot. It's amazing. But another reason why the Isle of Armor is so great is another character, Clara, specifically in Sword. I had Shield. I was unfortunately stuck with that absolute twat, whose name I don't even remember right now and don't care to. I think it started with an A. But Clara, again, one of the best characters in the franchise by far. I'm not normally into tsundere characters, but they did the tsundere so fucking well with Clara. They made her so likable, so attractive, so funny, that she is just insanely, exceptionally enjoyable to watch. But you also had the Isle of Armor itself, which was basically another wild area in its design and concept. And I thought that was a fantastic idea. It introduced a lot of Pokemon back that weren't in the main game, which is a good way to handle that because there's way too many Pokemon to have in just the main games themselves. You have, by having DLC, that's a good way to start bringing them back and everything. But yeah, so there was a lot that this was able to bring back in. You got a lot of characters from the main games who would show up randomly. And the story of the Isle of Armor and everything was great as well. And of course, we also had the Crown Tundra, which in terms of story outdid Isle of Armor. But in terms of characters, I would say probably Isle of Armor was a little better. The big appeal of the Crown Tundra for me was Mountain Daddy. Peony is one of the most needlessly hot characters in this series. Again, I'm not just trying to sound horny. I talked about how Honey is very hot. How I talked about how Clara is attractive, but it's like when I first saw Peony, I am not even kidding you. I gasped. Like, I genuinely let out a small, flustered gasp. And again, and the weird thing is, like, kind of like with tsunderes, I'm not always into that type. I like the entire thing with like big buff rugged men isn't always my kind of thing. But for some reason, just the design alone, the instant I saw him, I was blushing. There's a reason I call him Mountain Daddy. And there are things I would say, but I probably shouldn't right now, as to why that would be. But outside of horniness, there are some good characters. Peony's daughter, is pretty great as well. But that's about it for characters in the Crown Tundra. It's just, the characters are definitely not as focused on. The Crown Tundra itself, in terms of design and everything and concept, is very good. And I love the idea of having the Galarian forms of legendaries and having legendaries be such a focus there. The story with Calyrex is fantastic, and I, for one, like Calyrex. I know a lot of people are divisive on that. I think he's great. And the moments where he possesses Peony are the fucking funniest moments in, at least some of the funniest moments in all of Pokemon, without question. It is so sudden when it first happens. It caught me so off guard, and I burst out laughing. It was so funny, and I was not expecting it. But Peony, throughout the DLC, you get to see how, like, genuinely great of a person he is. Like, he's a genuinely great person. Also, you find out he's related to Chairman Rose, which is like, oh, you're Rose's brother. I can see it, but I'm glad that you didn't get the psychoticness that he clearly got. I'm glad that you are just a very nice, gentle, likable guy who just wants to be a good father and, like, knit all of his daughter's clothes, and it's like, God, you are so cute. Also super fucking hot. Take me, Mountain Daddy. Okay, I think I need to move on. I need to move on. On the other hand, let's talk about Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, because they existed, I guess. Here's the thing. Unlike previous generational remakes, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were pushed off on another company to make them. And as such, instead of just using the style of the generation like other generational remakes have done, they decided to go with a more chibi cutesy style, which is ugly as fuck looking and does not work. On top of that, the games are almost completely one-to-one remakes. There's like maybe a couple tiny differences, but the differences are so minute that unless you've never played a Gen 4 game before, there's not going to be anything new that will really get you to want to play again, rather than just playing through Gen 4 regularly. It's like there's really no reason to play it as opposed to Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. Because it's like the art style is actively worse, which is not something that should be a thing considering this game came out so many years after. This game came out in 2021. When did Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum come out? Diamond and Pearl came out in 2006, Platinum in 2008. That's over 10 years difference. And Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum still visually look better because Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl's art style is absolute dog shit. The games are a waste of time. Again, unless you've never played the games before, then I guess like maybe you could find something to enjoy about them, but they're a waste of time otherwise. There's not enough that sets them apart that makes it necessary. And pretty much everyone has agreed. It's become very much the popular opinion, surprisingly, that these games are a waste of time. When everyone talks about Gen 8, they're like, oh, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, those games happened. That was a thing. They exist. That's people's main thoughts on them nowadays. Because they just weren't good. And that is pretty much a universal opinion at this point. So, then we get to Legends Arceus, which came out early this year and revolutionized Pokemon. Legends Arceus became one of the best received Pokemon games ever. And even as someone who has hated on previous Sinnoh games, Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, I can't argue. Legends Arceus is phenomenal. It changes up the formula greatly. It gives a lot of updates to things that are very interesting, and that are even being carried into Gen 9. And it's so unique in the way it's handled that it's actually like surprisingly just exceptionally interesting to experience. The story is fantastic. Like, absolutely fantastic. The overall design of the world of Sinnoh in the ancient times that this takes place in, as well as just the character designs and everything, are fantastic. Definitely some really damn good designs. Zissou can crush my head between her legs, and I would thank her for it. I know everyone thirsts over Arezu, but for me, it's Zissou. She is fucking, like, I think 8 feet tall, or maybe 7. Maybe it's 7 feet tall. I actually calculated that based on other Pokemon I had with me. Either way, she's really fucking tall. She's buff, and she's really hot. Again, with the thirst. Again, I am getting too horny here. But yeah, it did everything right. The unique gameplay style, the way it actually is one of the, if not the only game in the series that actually makes catching them all a part of the game and actually makes it worthwhile to do. And it was just really fun to play. So, between everything in this generation, I honestly don't think Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl bring it down that far, because they weren't actively bad as much as they were just boring and unnecessary. They were so poorly handled, but they weren't actively bad in their handling. You know what I mean? It was just so bland, so basic. But because of the quality of Sword and Shield, because of the quality of the DLC, Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra, and the quality of Legends Arceus, yeah, Gen 8, legendary, without question. Now, Gen 9 could definitely be up there too, and based on the trailers we've been seeing, Gen 9 is looking to be very good. It's looking like it's going to improve on a lot of stuff. Like, there's a lot of new, big, important quality of life changes that they're introducing. A lot of great new Pokemon have already been revealed, and apparently there's leaks for a lot of others, but I'm avoiding the leaks like the plague because I don't want to be spoiled on anything that's not in a trailer. If it's in a trailer, fine, cool, whatever. It's an officially released trailer. But leaks, I do not want to see. I am not a Farfetch'd. Do not give me your leak. But in all seriousness, yeah. I'm thinking, just based on the trailers I've seen, that Gen 9 could be at least in pseudo-legend. Maybe legendary for me. But it's too hard to tell without playing it. I have my copy of Pokemon Scarlet already reserved, so I will be getting that day it comes out. And, yeah, hopefully it ends up being very damn good. But this is my rankings for the generations overall, which includes remakes and other games like that, not including spin-offs, though. Obviously, I'm sure yours is different. My opinions tend to be different from a lot of people's, it seems. And I would love to hear your opinions. I would love to hear your thoughts on the generations. What generation is your favorite? Let me know down in the comments below. And for now, I hope you all enjoyed. We will be getting to other lists like this throughout the week. But I'll keep those a secret as to what they're going to be right now. But they're going to be like tier lists like this. I will tell you that. So, that all being said, once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And for now, I'm Connie, and I'm signing off. See y'all next time.